This week on Eco Show, we're going to be talking about the reproductive cycle of moss. Mind-blowing, mind-expanding information about moss and how they do their reproductive cycle. Then we'll be diving into some recent research, which was a massive archaeological finding of fossils in an unexpected location. Following that, we'll be rounding out the show and going into the news, which will be talking about a recent lawsuit in Montana waged by children or waged by youths, and we'll see how that goes. We'll find out, did they win, did they lose? We'll be talking about some new ocean cleanup mechanisms, and then there's one more piece that you'll have to wait to see. It'll be a bunch of photos from the recent UK Weather Service. They're doing they do a photo contest each year, and so we'll look at some of those photos. This is Eco Show. Hello and welcome to Eco Show. I'm Henry. This is a show about ecology, the environment, news, and happenings in that space. Each week we talk about a thing of the week, which is a thing that happens in the environment or ecology. It could be a process, just something new to learn about. Then we'll talk about some recent research, and then we wrap up with recent news from the past week. So this week, our thing of the week is the moss life cycle, which definitely sounds like it would be kind of boring, but it's kind of a cool thing to think about. Moss is that green carpety stuff that you will have seen on rocks around about the place. It's in streams. You know what we're talking about when we're talking about moss. Moss appeared on land 470 million years ago. It was the first kind of plant material on Earth, and it caused an ice age. A huge ice age was caused by this because the moss, as it came across land, you might think that this was because of it taking down carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, which may have had some impact on things getting cooler, but the primary impact was actually that as the moss moved across the landscape, as it colonized land, it would break down the rock that it traveled over, and in weathering this rock, it would release nutrients that would go into the ocean and would lead to sequestration from the atmosphere. I had an alarm just went off on my phone and it ended the recording. Let me double check the recording is still happening. Yep, it's working. So the moss life cycle, really, I just kind of was curious about this and wanted to have it back in my head because it's something that I often forget, and so that's why I want to go over it. And it's kind of a cool life cycle. We're pretty familiar with how humans have their life cycle of having kids and how that cycle goes, but different beings have different ways of living and persisting in the world. So moss they have no vascular system. So when we think of most plants that can be flowers or trees or anything like that, the vascular system is allowing water to travel up through the plant. And that's why these things can grow up nice and tall. But moss does not have this. So that's why it's kind of more low and like carpet as you usually think about it. And it's usually in cool, moist areas, and it doesn't need to be submerged in water. The body of the moss is called a thallus. Of but that's the last kind of jargony word that I'll use. But there are some jargony words on this little image that I'll have up here that'll just take us through this process. So we have a moss that will be putting out a little stem with a capsule on top, and out of that will be released these spores. And those spores will be a mixture of male and female spores. And these will go out, and like we usually think about with humans, we have sperm and eggs that will go out and about. So these spores are released, and they'll go out and they'll develop into a male and a female form. So when you look out over moss, over that green stuff, you'll be looking at something that is either male or female. I'm not going to get into the genetics of this, but it is different than we're used to. So I'm going to keep it nice and simple. From these spores that are released from a moss, so a moss puts up a little stem with a capsule in it, releases these spores. The spores go out into the world and will develop into either male or female gametophytes, is what we'll call them, is the word for them, but it's just the moss that you're used to seeing. And those male gametophytes, which are just the spores that developed into moss, will produce sperm, and when a raindrop comes or some water comes and washes over them, those sperm will be released, and then they'll go down to moss that's female, which has eggs, which are sort of nestled inside of, it's not a leaf, but kind of looks like a little leaf situation. It's called an archegonia, but it's kind of it's what's holding the egg. And so these sperm will be washed down into the female ones where they'll be fertilized, and then a sporophyte will be produced from the egg and sperm combination. And that's just that little piece, again, that comes out, develops a capsule, and releases spores out again, which will develop into male and female moss bits. So that's the interesting thing to think about, is that moss will be male or female, and the situation that happens will develop this little sporophyte that will then release the spores again. So that's the cycle. The image is helpful for understanding how this happens if that was confusing. But anyhow, that's the moss life cycle. Hopefully I didn't lose you. But we'll move on to our research now, which is a little bit more easy to follow. And our research is looking at this big recent finding of fossils, which happened in Mangere, which is in Auckland in New Zealand. This was published just in August this year, so this is pretty recent. So there were excavations that were happening to, I believe, renovate or expand the sewage system. And while they were drilling, they came into an ancient shell bed. They found 300,000 individual life forms from 266 species. They were fossilized 3 million years ago, and 10 new species were identified. There were lots of mollusks, some sharks, whales, and other fish. These were all deposited in a shallow harbor. So here's a photo of some of those shells and mollusks and things that they found. And they had to go through this by hand. So this was the I think this was a post-grad role for a few lucky archaeologist students who went through all these. I can't imagine going through 300,000 individual life forms. That's pretty crazy. So I think it was 2 or 3 graduate students that went through all of this and sorted it out. The company that came across this just dumped it in a field for them to go through and to sort out. So they went in there, they sorted it out, and they found all of this cool information. And so pretty cool research that developed that's given us more information on what was around. This helps us to understand the history of things and things like this. So this was by Bruce Hayward et al. Doing this research. Okay, on to our news. The ocean cleanup, which we've talked about before, is one of the few, if not the only, organization that's really trying to clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And they have launched a new system. And this system can clean a football field area of the ocean every 5 seconds. And this is a pretty big new improvement for them. They're trying to get to 90% of cleaning done by 2040. So they're trying to get this 90% of this Great Pacific Garbage Patch cleaned up by 2040. And this system, which we'll have a photo of, has a barrier which is almost 1.5 miles long, so over 2 kilometers long, and it's towed by 2 boats. So it drags out and picks things up. The screen goes, and so you've got this big barrier in the water, and it drops down a screen which will capture the trash, and this goes down 13 feet or 4 meters below the surface of the water, and then they sort the plastic on board. You might be thinking, well, would this hurt the animals? And here's an image here showing the cleaning going on. I believe they've got an inner and an outer one. And I think you've got an inner method, and I think that's what they were using before. So you can see this new method they've got is pretty spectacular. Yeah, so you may be thinking, okay, well, is this going to be bad for the animals or dangerous for them? But it has this big net that they're casting out. It does have hatches in it that can let animals out. And it's also, they've got little cameras on it that are monitoring for animals that may be caught up in it. So hopefully it seems to be working well. They also, and another thing you might be thinking is, well, this is all well and fine, but is this really helping the problem of this plastic pollution in the ocean to begin with? And well, the plastic pollution problem is a big problem that needs to be figured out, and moving away from that, finding alternative solution of materials to use for our everyday items is really crucial to do. But they are rolling out solar powered barges to put in rivers, and they will be capturing garbage, and they're estimated to take out 220,000 pounds of garbage, or 100,000 kilograms of garbage per day. So you've probably seen images of streams that are really backed up with just huge amounts of trash, and these are aimed to do that. So they're being rolled out, I believe, in Indonesia. In Jakarta is one of the places where they're rolling it out. So they're working with a number of countries to get these in the streams. Again, this doesn't solve the problem of the reliance on producing and using these things, which is a big problem, but pretty cool to at least be working on this back end, hopefully, as we move towards more reusable forms of packaging goods. It's that thing again of, glass and paper were used, and sort of the tricky thing with a lot of paper stuff now, even when we think about your pizza box or anything like that, or most of the most of the paper stuff that you'll be wrapping stuff with, is even that is sort of coated with plastics a lot of time, even pizza boxes and things like that, in order to make it less absorbent for oils and all of that sort of thing. So it's a very challenging thing because there's so much byproduct from the oil production process, and it's such a big business, is just beyond I think probably beyond the practical aspect of it, is that there's just so much economic investment in the use of plastic. So that's where those individual choices are important for sure, but it's also really important that things are being done on a governmental, on a big scale, where that can make these changes happen. Because we can do stuff on our own, but at the end of the day, it's important to have those big changes changing from the government. And speaking of changes in the government, we've got 16 youths from Montana sued the state, and they won. They asserted that the U.S. state of Montana violated their right to a clean and healthy environment. So this is in Montana's constitution, that they are required to provide their citizens with a clean and healthy environment. And what the state is doing, which is what they were really suing around, is the state authorizes fossil fuel activity. So this could be gas, natural gas pumping, or things like that. I think natural gas is one of the big things in Montana, and they do this without accounting for it. So they are approving these land leases to extract these without including and accounting for the impact of those on future generations. And this is what this court found violated that right. So they're, by not accounting for the impact of climate change or the impact of fossil fuels, you are not working in your best way to provide a clean and healthy environment for your citizens. So the next step for this now is that the state will either need to change their laws, or they will need to appeal the ruling. So keep an eye out for that. I'm not too sure what they would go for there, but we're seeing an increasing number of these sort of challenges being held up in courts. And we hear a lot about bad things happening in the courts, but there are some of these good rulings that feel pretty nice to see. So that is exciting, and hopefully it continues to move on and groove on in a way that helps everything out. The tricky thing I was thinking about this past week is that it's so hard, it's challenging to make these big changes environmentally because of the way that the economic world is just, it feels so competitive. It feels like, if you do something that's just good for your citizens or the environment, that in economic terms, that's often a weakness that can be taken advantage of, or will mean that you have less capital to work with to battle other countries economically and things like that. So it's certainly a problem that is, because we have such a globalized world, it's such a hard problem to begin to tackle, even as a country, even as just one country. I just talked about how it's some of these problems are too big for the individual, and some of these problems almost feel like they're too big even for a country, because countries are constantly competing against each other to, move up the ranks or be more valuable or things like that. So, yeah, I don't know how you move to a point where you can have some sort of, environmental peace treaty where, and you've got to, at the end of the day, is come to an agreement that everybody's going to play by the same rules. Because if you're going to, stop extracting fossil fuels, but then, if Saudi Arabia is going to take advantage of that and then charge you more or whatever, it's just is like, yeah, obviously you're not going to go and shoot yourself in the foot in that way, even if in the long term of things. And I guess that's really is the thing, is moving out the view of our world and our place in the world to multiple generations, which is common in many places in different cultures around the world, but is definitely not in the dominant cultural mindset economically, is not thinking out multiple generations. Yeah, so maybe that's something we gotta do. That's something I'm gonna try to do, because I think it feels good on a personal level as well. I think it feels inspiring when you think about multiple generations in the world, because there's so many people that are like, oh, the world is gonna, fall apart or whatever. Things aren't gonna work out, and for a lot of people in the world, things are horrendous. Like, for a lot of people in the world, the sort of apocalyptic experience of life is occurring right now. When you look to lots of places, the poverty and the famine and things like that is all going on right now. So the idea that it's a distance away from the present is kind of wrong, because it's like, it's happening to some people, but also how that just shuts down any sort of thinking of how do we move out of the current situation that we're in. So instead of saying the apocalypse is coming, we kind of have to say, like, the apocalypse is already here for a lot of people, and I don't want to just be, rolling along while that's happening for people. How is it that I can get involved? And yeah, again, it goes back. It's such a hard thing because it's not just an individual thing, it's a societal thing. But that's at least my way of overcoming that individual feeling of, oh, I'm not doing enough, or, things are looking bad, is how can you reach out a hand for other people? What can you do? And maybe you need to ask for help as well. So, anywho, that is a little rant on that. And let's wrap up with some lovely weather photos. So, the UK has an annual photo contest, the UK Weather Service, if you pop over their website, they have an annual photo contest. And here are some of them. You can put in photos from wherever you are in the world. You can upload some photos if you'd like to compete. Probably for next year, it might be closed now, but you can certainly vote I believe, on current uploads. Our first photo is of a volcano in Chile with some cloud cover over the top, and we've got a little bit of lava that's bubbling away. So this is a long exposure. We can see from the moving of the stars dashed across the sky, and it was long exposure so they could get some of the glowing light of that lava out of that volcano. Super cool photo. Our next one is a tornado in Brazil. If you're just listening, this is a black and white, very moody photo. We've got two houses in the background and a cool combination of clouds all coming together. And our third photo, our third of four, is of the Fichtelberg, either Fichtel or Fichtelberg mountain in Saxony, Germany. Ooh, we've got, it almost looks like frozen people across the, walking up a hill to a cool kind of castle-like building. It's this lovely snowy expanse up at Fichtelberg Mountain in Saxony, and they must be trees or something, but they look very spooky up this hill. But it's a cool wintry photo. It makes me think of the line "The Witch in the Wardrobe" and how maybe she turned people into stone, but they kind of were giving me that sort of a feeling. And our last photo, I believe, yes, it's our last photo, is from Haunter Hill in Wales. And this is a photo of something called a broken spectre, where the shadow of the observer is projected out into space. So we've got two people embracing, and their shadows are embracing as well and are shooting out into like a rainbow, into a little rainbow circle. So it looks very magical and cool. Some very cool nature photos, very life affirming, very uplifting, very interesting. What sort of what have you got that's around where you're at that's cool to photograph? Something that I want to start doing again, which I did during a class in my undergrad, was a nature writing class where you sit at a place in nature and you make a decision of where this place is going to be a nice place to sit, and you commit to that place for maybe, at least 3, let's say, but ideally more, 3 visits. You can do it once a week or something like that. And you'll go back to this place and sit in the same place, and you'll just write while you're there. You can write your observations, ideally observations, and just what you're seeing, what you're experiencing. And you can really experience your deepening knowledge and feeling for the space as you go back to this place. And you can really get a pretty deep connection. I can still think of the place where I did this, and it just, you feel really a part of it in a different sort of way. You feel more a part of the space as you're writing it and exploring it and putting your mind in the environment. So let's try putting our minds into the environment and seeing what good things grow from that. So I hope you made it through the moss reproduction. I think things picked up after there. Things moved along a little bit better. Maybe I'll move the research around to the end, because the thing of the week, well, it was usually the thing of the week is pretty interesting, but yeah, that one might have been a little bit rough. Anywho, thanks for checking in, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.